This is a very special night for us. We've been planning this reading, I think, for over a year now. It's been a long time. Charles Bernstein, the sound went out. The sound has cut out. Is it still recording at least? Okay. Oh, there we go. Charles Bernstein and I have been in touch with Zhimin Li for many, many months, and this is certainly a rare occasion for us. I think this is certainly the first time we've invited a poet from China to come to the Writers' House, and I think it's also probably a first for PEN. It's a great evening for cultural exchange for us, and I think it's a wonderful precedent, and I hope it's something we can and do continue. This reading, luckily, is part of the Provost International Writers Series, Writers Without Borders. And through this project, Provost Ron Daniels has encouraged us to think beyond the confines of the East Coast, certainly, but also, more importantly, to reach out past the borders of this country. And we want to think and react and read globally. We want to participate in ongoing and I think emerging international conversations. We want to be engaging at what I think is a very crucial time for engagement, especially through the arts, which can do things that other ways of engaging can't. We can communicate through poetry in completely different ways, and that's important. And I'm really glad the Writers' House can be a part of that. And I want to give a very special thanks to PEN alumnus Seth Ginns, whose initial startup grant helps make this series possible and helps us continue it. And just thank you, Seth, for believing in us and for believing so strongly in international exchange and for wanting to make this possible for PEN, for Philadelphia, for friends from around the world. I think it's a lovely project. I would like to welcome up here to the podium Charles Bernstein, who is, I think, himself a prime mover and shaker in an international conversation about poetics. I think it's ideal that he's here to introduce Zhimin Li to us. So here's Charles Bernstein.
I'm very happy also to announce this event as our first public event of an association which is founded in the last couple of years and that Zhimin and I are part of and has its home base here at the Center for Programs of Contemporary Writing, which is the Chinese American Association for Poetry and Poetics, CAAP. This association was formed about a year and a half ago in Wuhan, where we had a conference, I think one of the largest conferences devoted to American or U.S. poetry of the 20th century. And this is where we met at this conference in Wuhan. I also had the opportunity to travel around mostly to English departments and foreign language faculties in China and sort of take up the program, I think, which this is part of too, that in China where English language is so crucial and so important, more so than Chinese is here, that it not simply be taught as a business school language, because in fact it creates a kind of difficulty of communication, and that literature, as it has often been here and in China, still serves a very practical function. And I always like to emphasize, and people in my class will know that our English classes, at least mine, serve no practical function, but this is really not entirely true, because it does serve this practical function, that by studying cross-culturally the poetry and the literatures of China and the United States, we create culturally and ethically literate students who are able to have a genuine dialogue. And so there are some serious consequences on both sides. One of the things that we both discovered in our conversations was, how little exchange there has been after about, say, 1930 or 1940 between the poetry cultures of our country, so that the scholars of American poetry and the poets there had a limited knowledge of U.S. poetry before the era of Frost and Pound and Eliot. And we had an even greater, at least I did and most of the people I know, an even greater ignorance, because we don't even know the equivalent of those poets I just mentioned in China. So it's an enormous gap to fill, but I think now a new generation and a new enthusiasm and internet and other kinds of exchange, it would be possible to do that through translation, through gatherings, through meetings, and through the cooperation peer-to-peer, poet-to-poet. When I talked with Marjorie Perloff, my friend who was on that trip with me, who's the president of our association, I should mention also that as a kind of prehistory here at Penn, that Liagang Luo, I'm probably not saying his name right at all, am I? But you're too polite to tell me. How do you pronounce his name? Liangong. No, not Nia. Liangong. His assistant.
Oh, yes.
Well, okay. I'll let you. And he was here at Penn as a visiting fellow studying Langston Hughes and was in my seminar. And all of a sudden started to come here to the Kelly Writers House and to hear about contemporary American poetry and got very excited about that. And then met Professor Nia, who's sort of organizational head of our program and the editor of Foreign Language Studies journal. And it was from him being here and seeing the way in which we react, professors and students, graduate students, undergraduates, to one another, that he had the idea of having this conference. So again, the kind of consequences of these cultural exchanges go much beyond what they can sometimes seem. He still is a scholar of Langston Hughes, but now extends that much beyond. When I spoke to Marjorie Perloff and we thought who to ask as both the Provost initiative but our own to come, Zhimin Li Zhimin, was our first person that we had in mind. I think partly I'd emphasize because he is very conversant with us, the U.S., with U.S. poetry and British poetry with English. And I think for an initial meeting like this is very important. But of course, my own ignorance of Chinese is profound, so it isn't a mutual ability. But I think at this stage, this is a crucial skill that he offers to us, that he has the knowledge of our poetries as well as our language, as well as being very involved with contemporary poetry and poetics in China, as well as modern and modernist poetries. As a historian, a scholar, and a poet, very much fits into the kind of context that Bob Perlman and I think of as the Poetics context here. He's an associate professor at the School of Foreign Studies in Guangzhou University, and is the director of both its Foreign Languages Training Center and its Chinese and Western Cultural Study Institute. So you can see that this is his work there is partly to bridge this gap. He's a fellow of the British and American Language and Literature Studies Institute and the English Poetry Studies Institute at Sun Yat-sen University. He's the Secretary General of the English Poetry Studies Association of China, and as I mentioned, a board member of our CAAP. More pertinently, he's a poet whose books are published in China. He's written a book on the influence of Western poetry on Chinese modern poetry and modernist poetry, and he put together a set of 2 meetings of British poets, the Pearl River Poetry Conference in Guangzhou in 2005 and 2008, and this brought the British poet J.H. Prynne, John Wilkinson, and others sort of in the Cambridge circle to China for meetings and translations, and begun that exchange here, which also puts them very much in touch with the kind of work that we're doing at Penn and otherwise. So he's been involved in translating that work and his work being published there, and also was in Cambridge in residence, and also had the opportunity to be in British Columbia last year for a short residency, and then also in Santa Barbara. So just in the last couple of years, he's managed to come to North America and to the UK several times. In any case, the first of what I hope will be many meetings and productive exchanges, it is my great pleasure, my great honor, to welcome my friend, the poet Li Zhimin, here to the Kelly Writers House this evening.
Thanks for Jessica's introduction and Charles' introduction. I arrived at University of Pennsylvania yesterday. And yesterday there was a little storm. And in my throat, there was also a little storm yesterday. So now my voice is a little bit sore. I'm sorry for that. I will try to speak clearly. If there is any problem in understanding me, please just put up your hands and I'm going to repeat. And it's my great honor to be here to present to you a few poems and a lecture on new Chinese poetry. And all my presentations here at Kenny Writers House are dedicated to our late beloved Emma Bernstein. Here it is my first poem. Live in light of love, to Emma. Footnote. They are always there, living in the gentle love of his, hers, yours, and ours. Since we have shared life with our beloved, since our shared life has brought, does bring, and will bring us happiness, how could anyone or anything, including the ugly little door of death, erase the experience of our life being together, or our love for each other? Space cannot separate us from our beloved ones, nor our beloved ones from us, as love unites us always so closely. Time cannot separate us from our beloved ones, nor our beloved ones from us, as love brings us together so often. Love can always bring us and our beloved ones together, whenever it is, wherever it is. Before love, time, space, and whatever are powerless. Love makes us and our beloved ones, those who are before us and those who are far away from us, into one being of God. Life is meaningless without love. Life is love. Love is life. Our beloved ones are always there, smiling in our love. Think of Emma's life. Think of Emma living in light of love. So in the following poems, there will be two versions, the Chinese version and the English version. And for each poem, I'm going to read the Chinese version first, and then to read the English version. And the first one, 反差。是啊，文盲们不会撒谎。是啊，博学们废话太多。Contrast. Yeah, she is illiterate. So she speaks her heart. Yeah, you read a lot. So you speak like a book. The second one. 有个人麻烦，大麻烦，太麻烦了。还好，没有放弃。追呀，赶呐，喊呐，叫啊，狂吼啊。可惜没有回音，哪怕一点点回声也好啊。 a soul. Troubled, puzzled, almost lost, yet not disheartened. Probing, questioning, running, shouting, screaming, but no answer. It should be good, even with an echo. Number 3. This poem is a little bit long, so I'm going to read one stanza, not one section in Chinese and one section in English, and then in this way. 虚拟存在。1. 时间在康河里流淌，一条思想之鱼来回穿梭。条鱼出游从容，是鱼之乐也。子非鱼，安知鱼之乐？子非我，安知我不知鱼之乐？康河从过去流来，康河向未来流去，没有一滴水珠停留在现在。国王学院后，徐志摩的金柳依然保留着春天的青绿，他的邻居们耐心地等待着哪一天也扬名天下。谁都会有机会的，不过要活得够长。三一学院的大门旁，留下大片的遐想。那棵著名的苹果树的后代没精打采，游人们争着和它合影留念。Non-presence. 1. Time flows in the river calm. A thought fish swims to and fro. See how happy the fish is. Please, how can you know a fish is happy since you are not a fish? Please, how can you know I do not know since you are not me? Can flows out of the past. Can flows into the future. Not a water particle holds to be the present. 徐志摩's willow tree behind King's College is still in spring green, and her companion is waiting patiently to become famous. Everyone has a chance if one lives long enough. By the gate of Trinity College, Newton bequeaths a large space to a thin descendant of his famous apple tree, with whom many visitors take many pictures. 2. 到处都是巨大的草坪，在同一地点赖了几个世纪。同样的春天，每年都来；同样的冬天，每年都来。总是那样美丽，那种没有变化的新鲜。草坪只让有些人走，那些学院员工。草坪只在有些时候可以看，在学院没有对参观者关上大门的时候。随处可见各种牌牌，各种宣示所有权的牌牌。巨大的树木占据着巨大的空间，不给新生命留下任何机会。凯斯学院黑色的烟囱上有一只黑狸，在傍晚时分行使自己的领地，它的歌声很美。一只老鼠小心翼翼地打着一个小洞，还是 不留神侵犯了邻居的地板。世界太小了，道歉，不行。黑色的乌鸦耐心地在树荫下等待。莫非证明某一天某个人的坏心情就能够将大地100次的变成天堂？战争能赚钱。2500多年前，老子说：“天下万物生于有，有生于无。”教堂仍然提供面包和水，不过来的人越来越少。如今的人们喜欢旅游，喜欢在广岛拍照留念。一只鸽子在康河畅饮，人们喜欢鸽子。Number 2, huge lawns are everywhere, growing on a small spot for centuries. The same spring comes every year, the same winter departs every year, with the same beauty and unchangeable freshness. Lawns can be walked on by college fellows. Lawns can be viewed when a college is not closed to visitors. All around are signs with their owners' titles. Huge trees are occupying huge spaces, leaving no chance for any new beings. A blackbird who perches on the back chimney of Keys College is claiming its territory at dusk. It sings beautifully. A moving mouse breaks his neighbor's privacy while digging a humble hole. Too small a world. Apologize? No. Dark crowds are waiting in the shade of trees patiently. Murphy proves that one day, a bad mood of a single person turns the whole earth dozens of times into heaven. All makes money. All things in the world are begot from somethingness, and somethingness comes from nothingness. Lao Tzu says 2,500 years ago. Churches still serve bread and water, but fewer and fewer comers. People go traveling a lot nowadays. Hiroshima is a good place to take pictures. A pigeon is drinking in camp. People love pigeons. 3. 康河里流淌着过去和未来，却没有现在。孔子来到卡奈尔桥上叹息，逝者如斯夫，不舍昼夜。美丽的黄色花瓣散布在女王学院的路上。真稀罕，朋友肯定地说。多少世纪所积累的繁杂条文，培养出驯服。自由，想要自由，往左看还是往右看？以前帮你的习惯，现在却会要了你的命。一位骑车的中年女子摔倒了，她说：“汽车的风太猛了。”一辆汽车呼喊着陌生人，在窄窄的街道上飞驰而过，地面颤抖着，将冬眠的蛇都唤醒了。肯定不是自行车手设计的，也许是一位不喜欢免费医院的人。捐赠。Number 3. Past and future runs in the camp constantly, giving no place for presence. Confucius stands on Clap Bridge and sighs. all that passes is here. Beautiful yellow flowers are strewn on Queen's Road. Very rarely, my friend assures me. All complicated rules of centuries cultivate obedience. Liberty wants liberty. Look left or right. Instinct that helped you will kill you now. A middle-aged lady fell down under his bicycle. The bus wind was pushing, she told me. A speedy car sounds alien in the narrow road. The earth trembles, waking up all snakes on the ground. It must not be designed by a cyclist, by a man disliking free hospitals, perhaps. Donation? 是。醉醺醺的诗人变成了艰涩的诗人。你不需要博士学位，可我需要工作。我不是那孩子，我需要朋友。怎么样让你成为诗人？什么使你伟大？在怎么样和什么之间的一条线，将你变得一文不值？削尖你的铅笔，往干枯的地上沾。杜子这样说：自由不能自杀，否则你的灵魂将受到惩罚。好吧，我活下去。Drunken poets grow into difficult poets. You do not need a PhD degree. I need a job. I'm not that child. I need friends. How makes you a poet? What makes you great? A line between how and what makes you nothing. Peel your pencil and drill into dry earth. Stomach says so. Freedom? No suicide. Or your soul will be punished. Okay, I will live on. 5. 绅士早已老套，早已过时了。可我的课本上的绅士形象那么好。嗨，英语变化很快。英语捞个及格都很难。他拼命地读，使命地喊。后来成了一名英语广播员，据说还说上了一口标准美语。疯狂英语风靡整个国家，成千上万的学生和他一起疯喊。他挣了不少钱。可是英国人从来不大喊大叫，他们吃饭时都抿着嘴唇，他们走路很快，一切都很安静，除了大街上撩人的接吻的噪音。他没法教他们学习英式接吻。5. A gentleman is antique and old-fashioned, but it means all goodness in my textbook. Well, English changes rapidly. To get to 60 in English is so hard. Read crazily and shout crazily. He eventually became an English broadcaster with a pure American accent, they say. Crazy English sweeps across the whole nation. Tens of millions of students are crazy and shouting with him. He makes a lot of money. But the English people never shout. They eat with lips shut and walk with quick paces, all in quietness, except for kissing noisily in the streets. He cannot teach them to kiss English kisses, 6. 麦当劳在全国迅速蔓延，却很难找到一位美国人来教英语。一位小朋友来到美国，惊喜地大嚷大叫：哇，美国也有麦当劳！学生们能够用英语相互交流，却不能和英美本土人士沟通。中式英语。教授从娃娃抓起，教你的小孩学好英语。干嘛？进入美国主流社会呀！哈哈，我花完了所有积蓄，可我的儿子的口音早已定型了。脚踏两条船，终究得不掉任何一只船。英语学习要从娃娃抓起。毛主席教导我们：纸老虎。McDonald's sprang rapidly all over the nation. Yet it is hard to find a good native American speaker to learn from. A Chinese child came over to visit the U.S. He exclaimed with great joy, "Wow, the United States has McDonald's!" Students can communicate in English among themselves, but not with the English native speaker. Chinglish. Professor, train your child at the very beginning. Why? To enter into USA mainstream. I spent all my life deposit, but my son has an unchangeable accent. A man in two boats. No one is his. English learning should begin from babyhood, Chairman Mao says. Paper tied. 7. 不好意思，明天我要去教堂。每个星期都去？是啊，这里的本地人都不去呢。我在家也经常去。几年前，一位朋友来到西方，工作间隙他发现有香蕉可吃。第一次时，他狠命的吃，后来再也不能。如今国内也大量生产香蕉，太多了，小孩们也懒得多瞧一眼。这种事50年前就过时了，可是我们那儿还算新潮呢。过时了。中国人为你骄傲。我是一个美国人。北京大学的礼堂烂成了一锅粥。过半数的北大清华学生去国外留学了，回国的很少。北京的新东方挣了很多钱，最近被美国公司指责侵权。西方的香蕉更大更甜，西方的月亮也更圆。Sorry, I have to go to church tomorrow. Every Sunday? Yeah, but many natives here do not go to church. I went to church when I was at home. A friend went to the worst a couple of years ago, and at a break, he found free bananas served. He starved himself the first time. Never again. Now native farmers are producing too many bananas. Their children would not turn back to give them a glance. This poem should have appeared 50 years before. But it is considered as after postmodern emanation. Outdated. We are all proud of you. Firstly, I should state that I am an American. The auditorium of Beijing University looks like a boiling pot. Half of the students in Beijing and Tsinghua universities go abroad, and most of them return not. New East School in Beijing makes tens of millions by offering TOEFL and GRE courses, but is recently accused by an American company of stealing. Western bananas are bigger and taste better, and their moon is more round. 8。我会回来的，我对母亲说，我对父母说。一片美丽的云彩，孤独地在天际漂流，一片落叶飘落在树根旁。庄子醒来，不知道是他做梦变成了蝴蝶，还是一只蝴蝶变成了庄子。I will come back. I tell my parents. A beautiful cloud is wandering lonely in the sky. A leaf falls to its root. Zhuang wakes up without knowing whether he is a butterfly dreaming to be a man, or a man having dreamed to be a butterfly. Cambridge. Oh, yes. 9. 剑桥布满了图书馆和博物馆，图书馆里塞满了书，各种各样的书走在剑桥的街道上，巨大的书、小巧的书格外与众不同。每个人都是博士，买面包的是，扫厕所的也是。蠢驴在剑桥也能出名，只要常常去酒吧偷吸几口博士们的烟雾，或者干脆将自己灌醉，绝不放弃本身。可是烟酒、鸦片、可卡因还有战争都能挣钱。我们有自由市场，我们有免费医院。壮丽的建筑带着美丽的古老的阴影。Cambridge is obsessed with libraries and museums. Libraries are obsessed with books. All books walk in Cambridge. Huge books or small ones make a striking view. No one is not a doctor here, neither bread sellers nor toilet cleaners. A donkey can become famous in Cambridge by just going to pubs regularly, smoking in some doctoral smokes, or getting drunken. Never giving up. But wine, cigarettes, opium, cocaine, and war makes money. We have a free world market. We have free hospitals. Magnificent buildings with beautiful ancient shadows. 10. 华丽的图书馆里摆放着许多书籍，蜗牛背负着巨大的壳在窗户上缓缓爬行，毫无表情。思想中的书籍太重了，渴望自由。文化的革命烧了很多书，还有颐和园，学了，塞满了，自己丢失了，摧毁语言，为了求新而创新。猜一猜，将传统切碎，自由冰冷且脆弱，恐惧和痛苦，壳烧了，只有文字还在。10. Books are seated in grand libraries. Snails with huge shells are crawling at pens, motionlessly. Books are too heavy on the mind. Freedom is wanted. The Cultural Revolution banned many books, and the Summer Palace. Land, crammed, no space for me. Destroy languages, new is for new's sake. Guess. Cut tradition into pieces. Free, cold, and vulnerable. Panic and pen. Shell bent. Only characters left. 11艾略特抛弃了美国，而美国人还追随他，这迫使我成功。不尊重英语，将它切碎为美国所用，将它扭成一个我，为那独立而独立，弑父情节。新的总是好的，皇帝的新衣总是最美的。Eliot rejected America. My contemporaries flocked to him. It forced me to be successful. No respect for English. Cut and separated for American use. Twisting it into a me. Independence for independence's sake. A father Jewish. The new is always good. New clothes of the king are always the most beautiful. 12. 绿草地精神饱满而和谐，散见于其中的小花亮丽而且友好，没有小说和电影中的牛群口诛病的恐惧。有人在踢足球，远远地坐下观看，不谈气候，天气够好了，太漂亮了，不是吗？像黑暗中一幅亮丽的图画，有时晴朗，有时下雨，有时在5月下雪，又出太阳又下雨，奇怪的天气，奇怪的和谐。空气干燥，风很烈，河里的鸭子十分悠闲。12. The green grass is vigorous and harmonious. Small white flowers among the green grass are pretty and friendly. No cows. It is described in novels and movies for the peril of foot and mouth. Some people are playing football. Take a seat at a distance to watch. Climate is too far away. Weather is good enough. Beautiful, isn't it? Like a bright picture in darkness, it shines and rains constantly. It snows in May sometime. Sunlight and rain at the same time. Strange weather, strange harmony. The air is dry and the wind is wild. Ducks in the river are a good view. 13. 有人在角落盖头，他的2条大狗吓着了不少人。不好意思，据说一个乞丐在深圳乞讨了几年，然后回家盖了一所漂亮的小学。我也想有一条狗，一条大大的狗，一条壳龙鱼在康河里闲适的游泳。等到鱼儿进化成为人类，我们的后代该吃什么呢？一个女孩在船上哭泣，别怕这些浪，康河的水只有膝盖那么深。各个角落的摄像头渐渐熟悉了各种接吻发出的各种声音，暖暖的餐厅大言不惭，像在家一样随便。喝一杯可乐之后，就可以好好聊聊个性和民主了。A man in a corner is asking for change. His 2 dogs scare many passers-by away. Sorry. It is reported that a beggar begged a few years in Shenzhen and built a modern school in his home village. I also want a dog, a huge one. A clownfish floats in camp comfortably. After fish evolves into human beings, what can our descendants eat? A girl weeps in a boat. Don't be afraid of the waves. The cam is only knee-deep. Curious cameras in all corners get familiar with all the different sounds of kissing styles. Warm restaurants boast. Fear-free and at-home place. Individualism and democracy. After soft drink in good talks. 时事：英国最古老教堂的时钟的动力源于一块石头，滴答，滴答，滴滴答。几百年已经过去了，不好意思，错了。哪里？我带你去。一只臭虫掉进一罐蜂蜜，蜜会干吗？甜蜜的征服，被征服也甜蜜，就像情人那样，就像朋友那样，矛盾的和谐。一只蜜蜂，细细的、闪亮的长腿在花蕊上跳舞。如果连怀疑也被消灭了，还会剩下什么呢？荣耀留在大地，许诺不会改变，康和会一直留下去。A clock in the oldest church of England, motivated by a stone. Click, click, and click. Hundreds of years have passed already. Sorry, wrong door. Where to go? I will show you. A bug falls into a pot of honey. Will the honey go dry? Conquer and be conquered, sweetly. It's between lovers or among friends. Contradictory harmony. With bright long, a bee, with bright long slim legs, dancing on flowers. And what remains when disbelief has gone? Honor holds the earth. Promise will last. The river Cam will flow on. So shall I continue going? Okay, I'm going to see what time it is. Okay, yeah. I think I'm going to read the last one. Okay. Okay, here it is, and the last one.他虫子静静地撕咬鲜嫩的心，心挣扎着一动不动。我在夏天时，他在冬天；他在夏天升起时，我又在冬天陨落。就这样，我们从未和谐过。他开跑了，在荒原里撩起风来，开始是微风，后来是大风，最后是飓风。我抓住他的头发，紧紧的。我还用腿夹住他的背，紧紧的。他暖暖的肌肉在下面滑动，做按摩，狠狠的，想停也停不下来。我差点栽了，好在他慢了下来。经理论曹，也许想尝尝鲜吧。他慢了下来。那位受惊的男孩趁机跳了下来，脸色也白，呼气也抽，心跳也快。3分钟过后，他又跑到马背上去了。 那匹马又开始跑啊跑啊跑啊，在荒野中，白云跑，黑云跑，紫色的云也跑，弯弯曲曲的康河也跑，空气异常骚动，只有一棵棵古树静静的矗立。She, a worm, bites a sensitive heart with mournful delicacy. The heart struggles to keep calm. She, when I am in summer, she is in winter. While she appears in summer, I have fallen in winter. Somewhat we never meet each other. She runs, bringing breeze, wind, and hurricane in the wild field. My hands clench her hair tight, my legs embrace her back tight. Her own muscle rushes beneath, doing massage hard. I am almost fall down. I do not know how to halt. Yet she slows down. Some fine grass attracts her attention. For tasting some tenderness, she slows down. The scared young boy seizes her moment and jumps down with a pale face, heart beating, breathtaking. 3 minutes past, he climbs onto the horseback again. The horse runs. White clouds, dark clouds, and purple clouds run in the wild field. The wide-ring river came runs. Many ancient trees guard the atmosphere wild. Okay, so this is all my readings. Thank you for your attention. So shall I come to the lecture?
Just, if you want, we go right straight through.
What's your idea?
I think we could just continue, if it's okay with you, just continue and we take a break.
Okay.
You'll have a talk on the influence of Western
Yes.
poetry, and then we will have a reception after the.
Yeah. According to the plan, now it is a talk on new Chinese poetry. But if you feel tired, we can have.
You need some more tea.
Yeah, I can. Yes, it's okay. It's okay with me. But I can have some more hot water. Okay, thank you.
Yes, you could put the hot water in the.
Yes, that will be. Okay, thank you.
Okay, if I come up while you're talking?
Yes, yeah. Are you okay?
Yes.
Okay. So the title is New Chinese Poetry, the Origin and the Development from the Perspective of Cultural Exchanges between China and the West. In this globalization age, no nation can survive, not to say develop, without learning from the achievements either of natural science or of social science of other nations. China is becoming more universal by receiving influences from the West, who had received influences from China in previous ages. Joseph Needham once said, "The more you know," quote, "the more you know of Chinese technology in the medieval period, the more you realize that not only in the case of certain things very well known, such as the invention of gunpowder, the invention of paper printing, and the magnetic compass, but in many other cases, inventions and technological discoveries were made in China which changed the course of Western civilization and indeed that of the whole world." End of quote. Joseph Needham offers many concrete examples to support his argument. In the field of politics, some basic institutions of China, including the civil service examination system, were imitated by Europe. Literature was also introduced from China into the West and carried much influence on Western literary circles. For example, Goethe once highly praised a novel from China, 好球传, in English is The Fortunate Union. In the field of poetry, China also carried much influence on the West. The most well-known example is Ezra Pound, who published Cathy, a book of all Chinese poems with only one exception. The River Merchant's Wives and Letter in Cathy is a good example that will demonstrate the charm of Chinese poetry that attracted Ezra Pound. The whole poem is full of fresh, concrete, energetic images, which are created by the technique of look-back strikes. For example, in the lines from the second to the fourth, a genteel poet might just rise, I played about the front gate. You came by on bamboo stools, you walked about my seat, in which it seems that the story is also made clear. However, the poetic beauty of the images is terribly undermined, as the images are much less concrete. The three phrases, pulling flowers, playing horse, playing with the blue plum, serves as backstrikes, hammering once more on the images preceded and guaranteed the finalization of beautiful images. By the way, the three phrases together produce a marvelous poetic rhythm and a wonderful poetic sound image as well. In the image of by the gate now, the moss is grown, the different mosses, too deep to clear them away. Two back strikes are applied, and therefore a very vivid image is produced. However, the most marvelous poetic achievement is the unprecedented and probably subconscious as well application of sound-linked image flow in English. The poetic technique is very frequently applied in traditional Chinese poetry, especially obviously in Chinese couplets. This technique can greatly free images from the bondage of grammar and therefore produce wonderful bondage of poetic image. And at the same time, readers do not feel the lines are loosened because of lack of good grammar, as the sound of words closely knit them into a beautiful acoustic unit. In The River Merchant Wives and Letter, pulling flowers, pulling horse, pulling with blue plum, though not a typical example, have more or less achieved this effect. Thank you. Okay, thank you. After Ezra Pound's successful introduction of Chinese poetry into the West, Western poets studied to learn more and more from Chinese poetry, most of whom are not disappointed. For example, William Carlos Williams learned the technique of achieving wholeness, is quotation, by means of uniting opposing elements, end of quote, from Bai Juyi, a fellow poet of Li Bai in Tang Dynasty in ancient China. It should be surprising to most readers that traditional Chinese poetry, which was very much admired and studied by Western poetry, was bitterly criticized and cast away by new Chinese poets at the beginning of the 20th century, who initiated new Chinese poetry by modeling Western poetry. In order to make the case clear, we need to examine the social, cultural, and literary backgrounds in China in which new Chinese poetry was conceived and finally was born. China had not known much of the West until the year of 1840, when England waged a war against the Qing dynasty government, thus commencing the modern age in China. China had remained a powerful nation for a long time. Even at the time when Columbus discovered America in 1492, China was still the most powerful nation in the world. It is no wonder that many European people, especially the upper-class people, should have so fancied Chinese products, as well as the Chinese way of living during the 16th and 17th century, just as many Chinese people very much fancy the Western way of living nowadays. China failed in the war with England in 1840. A failure followed with a series of misfortunes she had never experienced in the past. Finally, quote, the Chinese began to doubt anything of their traditional culture, and this gradually caused the May 4th movement that was to overthrow all traditional Chinese cultures and rebuild their culture by learning everything from the Western civilizations. End of quote. China had been learning from other nations and had always been accepting foreign cultural nourishment during its whole historical course. Yet the process of China learning from the West after 1840 is very special and different from all the previous ages. Before 1840, China had learned from other civilizations and had assimilated the elements of other civilizations into her own culture, that is basically of Confucianism. However, it is all different in the modern age. Quote, when China was confronting the challenge of the West in the modern era, Confucianism could no more observe it as it once had done with Buddhism, for example. It finally became the negative force in the development of Chinese society, causing the Chinese to fall into a severe ideological peril. End of quote. Confucianism, once the main foundation of Chinese culture, was revealed of many of its defects and was radically criticized by some Chinese vanguards, especially those who had won a chance to study in the West for some time. Chinese culture then experienced a collapse from within, resulting in an unselected influx of Western ideologies. Chinese literature, as a main carrier of Chinese culture, was first and foremost challenged and subsequently thoroughly reformed on the basis of modeling itself on the West. Even the Chinese ideographic characters that were established thousands of years ago and had been creating many literary wonders were seriously questioned and challenged. It was a crazy age in which Chinese cultural values were all questioned, re-examined, and often criticized, even without sound arguments. At the same time, Western models were introduced to replace the vacuum of many cultural practices. The learning from the West was well demonstrated by the translation of books, especially where the failure of reform movement of 1898 demonstrated the impossibility for the Chinese culture to reform from within. Many scholars studied a large-scale importing of Western ideas and methods. Since there were very few Chinese who had learned any Chinese language or cultures, most Chinese scholars chose to introduce Western ideology into China by translating Western origin works in Japanese. Quote, During the 300 years before the Sino-Japanese War of 1894 to 1895, the Chinese translated only 12 Japanese books. But within the 15 years after it, the Chinese translated 958 Japanese books, most of which were originally Western or written about the West. End of quote. The influx of Western works into China on this unprecedented scale then formally began the westernization of Chinese culture that had been up to then so well established that only an eternal upheaval could possibly shake and change it. Poetry, as the most sensitive element of Chinese culture, responded very quickly to the dramatic changes in China after 1840. Very soon after the Opium War of 1840, some reformation of Chinese poetry had already occurred. Gong Zhizhen and Wei Yuan, two famous patriots, claimed that there was an urgent need to change traditional Chinese poetry to serve their nation. They did some initial work in this respect, and later on, Huang Zunxian, and Liang Qicao made a true beginning at rendering classical Chinese poetry into a much freer form by accepting Western poetics. The most well-known resulting poetic reformation during this period was Huang's new style, whose core is to write as you speak. Liang, however, cultivated a much grander aim to reform traditional Chinese literature as a whole by challenging the traditional literary language, Wenyan. Later, people took Liang Qicao as the initiator of Baihuan literature. Baihuan literature just means literature in vernacular Chinese. And many important literary figures, including Hu Shi, Chen Duxiu, and Li Dazhao, were deeply influenced by Liang before the May 4th movement. Changes in the field of poetry only serve as an example. In fact, changes happened in all the literary fields after the Opium War, with the basic belief of reforming Chinese culture for survival. The movement of reforming Chinese culture grew, and finally, in 1919, it exploded, resulting in the changed climate of the May 4th movement, which was basically characterized by the Western ideologies, for example, democracy and science. Its fundamental significance was its acceptance of the need to learn from Western culture in reforming Chinese traditional culture and literature. Hu Shi's Some Suggestions for Reforming Chinese Literature, which was composed in the United States and posted back to China to be published by Chen Duxiu in New Youth, the vanguard of May 4th movement, was the most significant literary advance and was enthusiastically hailed and followed. The core of Hu's advocacy was to establish new Chinese literature by overthrowing the traditional one, the traditional literary language Wenyan as well. To overthrow Chinese traditional poetics, Hu Shi argued that vernacular Chinese is the true carrier of poetry, and thus that vernacular poetry should take the place of traditional Chinese poetry. He even exaggerated that, quote, in short, all valuable literary works in China since the Book of Poetry, which was composed thousands of years ago, are in the vernacular or very close to the vernacular, end of quote. Hu's criteria were very partial. Nevertheless, his standpoint was supported by many of his followers who agreed to simplify traditional Chinese literature with Wenyan that appears only to the educated class, so that the ordinary public can be well educated to do something on behalf of the nation. Hu Shi and his fellow cultural reformers did succeed in establishing vernacular Chinese as an officially accepted written language. However, if it had not been for the particular historical background, Hu Shi would never have succeeded so easily in establishing the vernacular instead of Wenyan as the solely right tool for poetry, because his arguments would never have been strong enough to do so in many other historical situations. Traditional Chinese poetry had undergone several large-scale changes in its history before the modern age in China. After four-word poetry declined, there appeared songs from the south. After songs from the south declined, there appeared four-word poetry. After four-word poetry was seven-word poetry. After the Asian style poetry was Lü and Jue, followed by Ci. End of quote. Wang Guowei gave a more academically reasoned explanation for this phenomenon. Quote, all those changes happened because after certain literary form got into circulation, more people would utilize it, and then a rigid pattern would take shape, which would prevent even the well-educated people from making attractive literature. Therefore, people abdicated the old forms and created new ones. This is the reason that all prosperous literary forms finally declined. End of quote. However, Wang's explanation cannot be applied to explain the formation of New Chinese poetry because New Chinese poetry had been established and widely accepted even before any literary wonders were created in this literary genre. And during all the 20th century, many people, including poet Chairman Mao Zedong, although he supported New Chinese poetry politically, repeatedly questioned the success of New Chinese poetry as a literary type. During the years around May 4th movement, many persons that had the best advantage in interpreting Western culture and literature usually being those who had actually spent significant periods abroad, acquired a considerable measure of fame. Hu Shi, who had stayed for 8 years in the United States and finally earned a PhD at Columbia University in New York, was one of the few important persons that ignited the new Chinese literary movement. Hu Shi said, quote, this movement, that is, the May 4th movement, which is generally called a literary revolution, I myself prefer to address it as the Chinese Renaissance, was initiated by my friends and I in American University dormitory in 1915, 1916, and 1917. End of quote. His attempting poems, the first poem collection in vernacular Chinese, which was widely distributed and imitated, formally starting the new Chinese poetry history, is actually of quite limited literary quantity. Its most significant value seems to consist in the very fact that it is in vernacular Chinese, like a small food that has just been released, as Hu himself later on apologized. It is almost certain that Hu indeed lent or copied some models from Western literature for constructing his famous 8 no's, a prescription which he drew up for reforming Chinese literature and which became highly esteemed during subsequent literary movements in China. In fact, while Hu was studying in New York from 1910 to 1917, the imagism that had been proposed by Ezra Pound was quite influential there, and Hu copied the proposals of the American imagist Amy Lowell in his notebook. The imagist proposed to create free verse in new rhythm and new form, using daily language rather than old-style poetic vocabulary. There can hardly be any doubt that Hu borrowed some ideas from the imagists who learned from traditional Chinese poetry themselves. Hu Si, in a sense, is one of the few persons who set the literary direction for the May 4th movement. His Western background and Western literary characteristics thus strongly promoted the Western poetical characteristics of New Chinese poetry. Soon after Hu's attempting poems, there emerged many poem collections that more or less based themselves on some imported Western poetics, among which Guomo Ro, the Goddesses, which was published in 1921, is a good example. The Goddesses is generally considered as the very beginning of Chinese modern Romanticism that created the first climax of New Chinese poetry. It's of very obvious Western characteristics. The title image, Goddess, is from Western mythology. The Western image, quote, the Western images in the Goddess are much more prevalent than the Chinese ones. Such Western mythic images as Apollo, Venus, Cupid, Bacchus, Prometheus, Hygeia, and etc. There are almost many Western historical terms, and there are even many words in English in this Chinese poem. End of quote. To directly apply Western sentences in a poem did never happen in traditional Chinese poetry, and it is rather ridiculous that a poem supposedly for the complex people should apply some sentences that only very few well-educated people could possibly understand. The same problem applies to the Western images in the goddesses too, as fulfilling the supposed target of New Chinese literature to serve the ordinary people. Since the conveyed meanings of such Western images could not possibly have appealed to any but specially trained ears. Later on, up to the present, New Chinese poetry has been going further and further towards Western poetical development, as well as away from its complex native readers. As soon as the Goddesses was published, it quickly became popular within Chinese literary circles and thus firmly established Go's position as a leading figure in the literary world in China. However, the overall most important factor in the Goddesses that appealed to Chinese readers was not so much its literary content, but rather its patriotic theme, as it enthusiastically hailed China as a phoenix coming to a rebirth by burning herself painfully, most forcibly evidenced by the poem Rebirth of the Goddesses. Quote, "Ladies and gentlemen, you have become tired of living in a fetid gloom of this dark world. You surely thirst for the light. Your poet, having dramatized so far, writes no more. He has, in fact, fled beyond the sea to create new light and heat. Ladies and gentlemen, do you await the appearance of a new sun? You are bid to create it for yourselves. We will meet again under the new sun." End of quote. Besides, the Goddesses is heavily laden with strong optimism that was very precious for China in a dark age. Most poems in the Goddesses are happy and energetic, such as Sunrise, Good Morning, Shouting on the Rim of the World, O Earth, my Mother, Sea of Light, Hymn to the Sun, and Stirring of Spring, etc. More often than not, the popularity of a piece of literary work does not necessarily go together with a high level of literary merit. In the Goddess, there are so many superfluous words and unqualified sentences that a well-trained eye can clearly say Go is lack of precious control over either diction or emotion. Any emotion, not to say unqualified diction, that goes beyond control in a poem should be considered as superfluous and shallow, which would only offend an ear instead of offering any ordered beauty of expression. There is no wonder that there should have been so many superfluous and shallow poems to serve the complex, being produced during the Cultural Revolution years while Go held the official leadership of literary circles in China. Go might have understood his own poetic limitations later on, since he said frankly that, quote, "Viewed as literature, these poems might disappoint the reader. Let them rather be taken as recording of the age in which they were written." End of quote. It should also be remembered that to point out the few drawbacks in the Goddesses is by no means to deny its being a literary milestone in the history of New Chinese poetry, not to say to denigrate Go, the poet, as one of the greatest literary figures in the history of New Chinese literature. since Guo also wrote quite a few remarkable novels that should be worth much more recommendation than his poetic creation. New Chinese poetry during the period from 1949 to 1978 is to be only briefly discussed, for New Chinese literature as a whole did not make any significant progress, if any, during this period, especially during the 10-year Cultural Revolution from 1966 to 1976. The problem was caused by the wish to make literature serve as a subordinate instrument for politics, which resulted in the extreme formalization and generalization of all literary creation in China. The revolutionary personage in most revolutionary writings are perfect in all respects. The former chapters of such works informing readers about their later ones. Therefore, quote, during all the 10 years of the Cultural Revolution, there occurred only 8 model plays and 1 author, as people said in joking tones during those days. End of quote. Literary circles, including that of poetry, were depressed as a whole. However, the slogan of literature serving as a subordinate instrument for politics was officially abolished in the late 1970s, liberating literature from its prolonged chains. After the removal of the chains of literature serving politics, misty poetry gradually grew and finally bloomed. It is conventional wisdom to say that misty poetry is made up of the sighs, complaints, and songs of the long depressed and then newly released intellectual spirits. Therefore, it is not strange that misty poetry was mainly concerned with political themes and was addressed as political poetry by some critics. More than politics, misty poetry was also concerned with humanity, cultural tradition, and intellectual existence, being much more advanced in comparison with the poetry in the previous ages, which can be viewed as a partial return to and a further development of the Mayforce literature. Misty poetry as a whole is quite a misty term. The misty poet Gu Ceng said, quote, some of my fellow poets and I have always considered the term misty itself to be rather misty. End of quote. Misty poetry was perhaps considered as misty just because most readers, especially some officially important critics, had long accustomed themselves to easy slogan-like poems. The misty quality of misty poetry results in profound poetic beauty, establishing an embryo of a new Chinese literary language that is independent of both Wenyan, the classical poetic language, and Baihua, the vernacular Chinese that had been more or less formalized by the previous literary works, where poetic imagination is at ease, and often at his best. A person without a literary appreciative capability would always feel confused and troubled confronting a misty poem, while one with it would only feel inspired and gratified. Although most misty poets had seldom been abroad before winning themselves the title as a poet, their works are found to be very westernized. Su Ting, who was found to be following Western poetics to a great extent, is one of the most popular misty poets. Su Ting is a woman poet. Quote, the majority of critical discussing of Su Ting's poems are mainly influenced by the West. Some papers state that the poetical techniques of modern European romanticism, symbolism, and imagism can be found in Su Ting's most excellent works. Other papers declare that concerning the matters of form, theme, and methods of expression, Su Ting deliberately imitated the Western poets. End of quote. In fact, misty poetry is found to be characterized by the use of Western writing skills and poetics that were and are extremely diverse and various. Compared with their predecessors in the first half of the 20th century who had personally stayed in the West for a fairly long period of time, many Misty poets based their acceptance of Western poetics on the basis of Chinese language through their reading experience in Chinese, mainly through translations. The major disadvantage of this is that they had unavoidably missed a lot of poetic beauty of the original works, and the major advantage is that they accepted Western influence in an inwardly digested way. In other words, they would accept whatever was beneficial for their poetical practice, even to the extent of intuitive acquisition, which prevented them from adopting themselves that is not consistent with the Chinese language, such as directly applying Wenyan language into their poems. The years around 1990 are generally considered as the end of the poetical period of Misty poetry, as well as the beginning of the new period of the 1990s, a new age of individual creation. The so-called individual creation tendency, which appeared in embryo during the poetry exhibition in Shenzhen in 1986, refers to the fact that every single poet is seen as writing in his or her own particular way. It might be on account of this, of the fewer social atmosphere and the great success of the Misty poets, millions of copies of their works were sold out, that there came an age of profuse production of poetry as well as multiplying poetic schools around the turn of 1919, which is topped by the exhibition held by the Shenzhen Youth newspaper and the poetry newspaper in 1986. I just want to insert one comment. You see, in China, even now we take it as a low tide for poetry. Still, you can sell thousands of copies of poetry books in one single year, and it is considered a very small number.
So we want that low tide here in America.
Yeah, it's only comparatively low tide. When it is on the top, millions. Where did I stop? Here, you see. Around 80 different poets' schools and poetical dogmas were presented during this exhibition, and the total schools in China are believed to have been more than double that number. As there so many isms and schools were making many experiments, radical or moderate, of which some were failures, others successes, the poetical characteristic of the era of the 1990s, an age of no poetical authority, gradually took its form. The many schools and isms made the pro-classification critics feel very confused, dizzy, and desperate. Quote, post-Misty poetry is a kind of blend of new classicism, new romanticism, modernism, etc. None of them can be classified into any certain school. End of quote. So certainly this is their typical comments. The date of Hai's, a prominent new Chinese poet who committed suicide on the Shanghai-Guan Railway over Easter in 1989, chose for his self-determination is a further side of the Western features within the new Chinese poets of the 1990s. In a book entitled as The Selections of the Jottings of Contemporary Chinese Poets, all the 35 poets frequently quote foreign poets, critics, philosophers, or experts, while few mention any Chinese poet or critic, either classical or modern. And in another poem collection, a poem selection of the most popular Chinese poets in the 1990s, not necessarily really the most popular. Poets such as Sichuan, Baihua, Yihai, Lin, Dong Wei, Mo Yaping, BC 1, and others graduated from foreign language departments in universities in China. Other poets also have a specific relationship with the West. For example, Wang Jiaxing stayed in England for 2 years and traveled in Europe widely. Liu Dan stayed in the United States from 1991 to 1994. Liang Xiaoming claimed to have begun writing poems after he had been greatly moved by reading Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. Hida Chun's most favorite books are Tagore's Stray Birds and the lyrics of George Gordon Byron, and Alexander Pushkin. Ma Li's literary craze are aestheticism and mysticism. Lie Pei says the first book he read was Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea, and the first poet he became familiar with was William Shakespeare. One particular poetry group, the Chinese language poet group, that has recently obtained some attention at home and abroad, at the very beginning of their manifesto declared, quote, "We object to localism and ethnocentric, in a word, to nationalistic writings. Our writings are of the world, an open box. Through writings, we hold conversation with contemporary art of global significance and with modern Western art in particular." End of quote. This manifesto was published in 1988, 10 years after Bruce Andrews and Charles Bernstein initiated the journal Language in February 1978. However, according to Zhang Ziqing, a leading figure who specializes in American literature in China, American language poetry was not introduced into China until the summer of 1990. It is not important, actually, whether the Chinese language poet group was shaped under the influence of their American counterpart or not. The fact that they are so eager to hold conversation with the West speaks for itself. The difference of cultural and social backgrounds between Chinese and Western poetry granted them very different spirits in tradition. In China, poetry was generally of the ruling classes, and most poets were a part of them. And Western poetry was more of the people, and more poets were plain persons. Thus, Chinese poetry was mostly for the ruling class, having an aristocratic tendency, while Western poetry was more of the people, having a very strong rebellious tradition. John Milton in England should be a very good representative of the rebellious poetical spirit, while in China, beginning from Qu Yuan, a poet who would at most complain, not to hate, never to rebel in his poems. However, the spirit of Chinese poetic tradition suddenly changed to be very rebellious at the beginning of the 20th century, when new Chinese poetry took form under the direct influence of the West. Contemporary Chinese poets should be among the most rebellious spirits in China, probably throughout the world as well. Because of the social difference of Chinese and Western poetry, Chinese poetry was concerned more with aesthetics and Western poetry more with ideologies. But this difference is not very obvious, as there are some opposite evidences on both sides. It can only be viewed as a difference of degree. However, after the introduction of Western poetry into China, new Chinese poetry suddenly became very ideological, concerned much with social and political issues. In fact, the famous mystery poetry movement was so political that some critics would even address mystery poetry as political poetry. But the strong appetite for beauty is exactly the same in both Chinese and Western poetics. This is probably why a beautiful Chinese poem can always find readers in the West, and the same in the other way around. Quote, "Inasmuch as we are all members of one human race, Chinese culture is in our culture. Poetry is the heart of Chinese culture. The heart of Chinese poetry beats in us too. End of quote. This convincingly demonstrates that Chinese poetry and Western poetry can indeed learn and benefit from each other. There has been a very strong voice in the poets' circle insisting that the best way to proper Chinese poetry is to blend Chinese and Western culture together, even as early as in the late 19th century. Quote, the giant of poetic revolution, Huang Zhenxuan, had much the same views as Liang Qicao. That is, they both considered that the way out for Chinese poetry is to blend Chinese and Western cultures together. End of quote. However, before any blending, the following few points should at least be done. A good understanding of oneself. B, a good understanding of the other. C, a good understanding of their differences and similarities. D, a good understanding of the positive and negative consequences of their exchanges. Besides, the most desirable is that the person himself should be an ingenious poet. There does exist a chance for new Chinese poets to bring their works into great success if they would choose to learn from both traditional Chinese poetry and Western poetry in appropriate ways. Quote, in June of 1823, in the paper of The Local Color of the Goddess, Wen Yidou, he is also a very famous Chinese poet, Wen Yidou said, I am always thinking that new Chinese poetry should be different from not only traditional Chinese poetry, but also from Western poetry. That is to say, new Chinese poetry should not remain purely local, yet it should keep its local character. It should not be totally Western, yet it should absorb Western poetic advantages. New Chinese poetry should be the sum produced by a marriage of Chinese and Western poetics. End of quote. And some famous Western scholars have also stated this expectation of combining the advantages of Chinese and Western cultures together. For example, A. Richards, he once said, quote, we have not yet realized that the quality of the world life that our children are to inherit depends quite as much upon the character of the new China as upon any other one factor we can think of. If we were wiser, we would make incomparably greater efforts to see that the values we most believe in came to the Chinese as freely and by as good channels as we could devise. Only those who have had the opportunity of working with Chinese students know how great their powers and how needlessly entangling and frustrating their difficulties are. A new age is being created in this wedding of East and West. Those to whom history gives some faith in humanity will envy the Chinese the richness of the joint heritage which will be theirs. A. Richards was a very famous British scholar who had worked in China. It is not likely that he should say anything without a profound meditation. However, no matter how strongly would people like to blend Chinese and Western cultures with poetry with the beating heart, this marriage is certainly not like one between two lovely persons in a warm church. Thank you very much. This is my... Hi, can you say something here?
Thank you so much. We have a reception now, and we thank you so much for your just enormously comprehensive both reading, poet, scholar, critic as you are, which so much brought out much of what you said in your very panoramic lecture. We appreciate it so much, and let us join us. Have everybody join us for a reception.
Okay, thank you for your attention. Thank you.